In this video, we're going to continue on with our real-world testing. So far, though, we've only really covered class-based views, and we've talked about views, and we've talked about mixins as well. However, there's a lot of people out there that still deal with function-based views, and we also need to know how to test those. So we'll take a look at this Django app that we have in the accounts. We'll go ahead and look at our views, and we'll see we have a register view. This is a view that we're going to use for our users to be able to register using the built-in Django authentication system. We're setting the name, we're determining if it's a post. If it is, we're creating our form, pre-populating it, and checking to see if it's valid. And if it's valid, then we're saving and then returning. Very basic function-based view, but we need to be able to test it. Close out of this and go into our tests. You can see I've already done a bunch of imports, so we don't have to worry about that. We'll start by doing class register view test, here from test case, and then we'll start by doing our setup. We'll just simply do our mock, and then we're going to set a request factory. I've already done a previous video on request factory, so we're not really going to discuss it. You can find a link to that video in the show notes. We're going to set our teardown method. Then finally, we'll get started with our first test of test get. This is where we're going to do our get request. We're going to build a request from our request factory. And then we're going to set an empty session. And then we're going to follow that up by calling our register view, which is a function. So we'll just do a normal function call, pass in our request object that we built. And then we'll get back our response. And then finally, we'll do our assertion to make sure our status code is 200. We'll do an assert not contains. And this is text that would be there if the form didn't pass validation, so we want to make sure that it's not there. There are many other types of assertions that you can do. These are just two quick ones I threw together. So let's actually go ahead and give this a test, and you'll see when we run it, it actually passes. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create our next test, because we have essentially three branches in our code. We have the branch where we do a get request, we have a branch where we do a post request and the form isn't valid, and we also have a branch where we do a post request and the form is valid. What we're going to do is we're going to do our valid form on a post, and it's set up fairly simply. We're going to first stub out a couple of methods in our user creation form. We're going to stub out isSave and save, and then for our isValid we're going to return true, and then we're just going to mock out the save and not worry about returning anything. And then from there we basically do the same thing we did above, where we build our request, we set our session, we call our register function, and then we do an assertion. The only difference is we're going to be sure that our response URL is equal to the same URL as what we go to whenever we do a redirect. Check that our response.url matches our home URL. So we're going to go ahead and run this, and it fails. And the reason this fails is because we didn't change our get to a post. So if we'll change our get to a post, go back in and run it, then we see it pass. So that shows that we've taken care of that new path. And then finally, we're going to do our test invalid form post. Since it's going to be fairly similar to the valid form, we can actually copy and paste, setting up our request and our session and calling our register method. And we can also go ahead and paste our other assertions that we had at the top to get our 200 response. And instead of assert not contains, we can set assert contains to make sure that the error is there. So we'll run our tests again, and we'll have three passing tests. So it's all great, fine and dandy for registering a user. But we also run into an issue where we want to do testing where a user is already created, and we need to make sure we have them authenticated when we do our request. So as an example, if we look at our view, we have our dashboard function-based view, and it has a login required decorator. Other than that, it's your simple setting context data and a render to response. So our big thing though is that we want to test both that it gets redirected if the user is not logged in, and we want to test that we get a non-redirect whenever the user is logged in. So to do that, we're going to create our dashboard view test. We go through our setup and set our request factory. Then we're going to do a test get not logged in. We're going to build our request from our factory and then also set a blank session. And then the next thing we're doing is we're setting our request.user to an instantiated anonymous user. We do this because the isAuthenticated method on anonymous user returns false. So when it goes through the decorator that when we call the dashboard function, it's going to return false and we should get a redirect. So we're going to call our dashboard function with our request, and then we're going to assert that the response is a 302. So since we're actually going to have a fairly similar test for a successfully logged in person, we're just going to go ahead and copy and paste this, change it to test get logged in, and then we're just going to go ahead and create a basic user with our mommy.make, because when we have an actual user object, when we call the isAuthenticated method in the decorator, then it's going to return true, showing that that user is logged in. Finally, we'll do another assertion, and this time we're going to assert that the response is a 200 status code instead of a 302. Finally, we'll get out of there and we'll run our test, and we have 5 passing tests. And that's it. That's the basics of how you test function-based views. The key things to note are, if you use a request factory, you need to call the function of your function-based view as a function. And then also you need to figure out every single branch that is in your function-based view and test each and every one of those. As you can see, you can copy and paste large amounts of your tests and just reuse them and only slightly modify them. This is actually a practice you'll use all over the place, but it's more prevalent in function-based view tests.